And delighted to say we're joined in the studio now by former tennis professional, OTB AM regular Jenny Claffey. Jenny, good morning to you.
Good morning to you guys.
How's it going?
Not too bad.
In morning this morning, is that a...
Absolutely, I've just put the Kleenex away there.
Yeah. I think there's a bit of that going around around the office this morning with a few certain characters. The greatest player in the greatest time in men's tennis was a quote from Barney Ronay in The Guardian that I read last night. Is he the GOAT? Is it a qualified GOAT? I
think it's fair to say he could be the undisputed GOAT. Looking at his tennis records, you know, he's won 20 Grand Slams, 103 career titles. He's been surpassed by Nadal and Djokovic with Grand Slams, but I think you can still consider him the greatest of all time for what he's done for the sport on and off the court. Yeah,
it's a strange one, isn't it? Just with that, like, because it always at some point comes back to the numbers, and it's hard to stack it up on that side, obviously. But his all-round manner and way seems to have really elevated him beyond the other two in a way that, particularly in Djokovic's case, I was trying to think of the football analogies, like there's he's probably Messi, I guess.
Yeah.
And Djokovic and Ronaldo, I'm not quite sure where it leaves Nadal, to be honest. I haven't got that far in the analogy just yet. But his general way of being seems to be a thing that definitely helps elevate him in people's mind.
Yeah, he's just a true legend, like, and a complete role model. And, you know, he is the epitome of a sportsman. Like, he is, how he carried himself for the 24 years that he was playing tennis was just amazing. You know, he obviously had his ups and downs throughout his career, but he was just such a champion. Like, if you look at him, he is somebody with elegance and grace, and he respects the game so well. And it's just hard to fault him, as I said, like his game or the person that he was. He transcends the sport, and his legacy will live on.
Yeah, I think it's the off the pitch stuff it's so impressive as well. And you've obviously been there as a professional tennis player, so to do that for 24 years, you have to be, you know, an unbelievable athlete.
Yeah, and it's also, let alone his athleticism is fantastic, and, you know, it's carried him through 24 years, which is insane. Like, a bit like Serena Williams, you know, they've had such a long career, longevity in the sport. But off court, you know, he's obviously looked after his body incredibly well as well, and he's just somebody, I think, over the years he was very clever with how he played his career. You know, he picked and chose tournaments that suited him, the surface as well, but also just to make sure that his body was in tip-top shape when it came to it.
What is it from your point of view? Like, we can all sort of geek out about, you know, what a great guy he was and he did great things for tennis, but technically, what was so good about him? Breaking
down his game, you know, his forehand was just arguably the greatest forehand in the game. His technique is so simple on the forehand side. He was able to run around his backhand a lot, and he used his forehand to dictate all of the play pretty much. His anticipation of the game was phenomenal. He'd be staying very close to the baseline and would take time away from his opponents at all times. His backhand, you know, I would have liked to see him play a little bit more offensively with his backhand, but he was still very solid on the backhand side. He would play with a lot of topspin, whereas his forehand, he would mix it up more. He was able to hit with like more flat, more topspin and angle, so he was able to exploit all areas of the court with his forehand. And then again, his serve was just amazing too. I didn't have the fastest serve in the game, but it was just so accurate. So he was always able to point out his spots on the court. And the best thing about that was the disguise on his serve was amazing. So he would throw up the ball toss, and the opponents would not be able to get a read on where it was going to be going until the last second when he'd contact the ball. You'd see by the racket angle face where it was going. So there was a breakdown. I was watching a breakdown of his serve. Like, he was serving down the tee on one side and serving slice on the same side, so they were obviously two very different serves, but up until like the last split second you couldn't see where he was going with the serve. So that disguise obviously keeps your opponents guessing, and therefore he was having so much success and winning with that serve, and then being able to back it up with that dominant forehand.
Yeah, you mentioned about the power there as well. I did read a quote with him at some point early in his career where he was saying, like, when he felt as if he was hitting the ball, he could almost leave a hole in the ground, and obviously that sort of diminishes after a while. So was that smart sort of disguising of his shots, or like that sort of cute play or more technical play, was that always a part? Was he once a power game and then it morphed into something when he got a bit older, or was that always there throughout his career?
Well, sorry, also to mention his movement was amazing too, so he had that as well, like the anticipation and movement. Like, he just looked like he glided around the court. It was just like, it was scary watching him. It looked like so effortless, and that's how he made the game look. But the power, he's made adaptations throughout his career on his game, because that power, you can play a power game, but he also was a serve and volleyer as well in the beginning of his career. Like, when he beat Pete Sampras in Wimbledon 2001, people were looking at him going, oh, that serve and volleyer game style is still a part of the game. And then as his career progressed, then he kind of mixed things up a little bit more, and then became very dominant with the forehand and playing with the power, but he did mix things up, so it wasn't just power the way he would play. He just had great tactical awareness and that flair on the court to be able, and creativity to be able to mix up his game when he needed to against different oppositions.
He was on the scene for sort of 4 or 5 years before he won his first Grand Slam, and I don't know if you can remember that time because you're younger than him, but do you remember that sort of, was there an excitement about him with people going, you know, sort of Rory McIlroy-esque, this guy is going to sort of win a lot of Grand Slams, or was it more of a slow burner?
Yeah, when, as I mentioned there, the 2001 Wimbledon, when he beat Pete Sampras, Pete Sampras was going for his 5th, I think, Wimbledon title or something, and he beat him in a I think a shocking quarter-final or something match, and then people started to talk about him then, and then there was about 18 months I think or so, or maybe another 2 years until he actually won his first Grand Slam, so there was a lot of hype there, and when he won in 2003 in Wimbledon, he broke down with Sue Barker in an interview, and I think he was kind of saying that this was the relief of the pressure and expectation that people had been putting on his shoulders, and then from there he just dominated for the next 5 years. Like, he would think he won 12 of the next 18 Grand Slams, which I think it's incredible. Yeah, just phenomenal those records he had set, and that's where the argument comes in about the greatest of all time. That period of dominance he had, we had never seen before in the sport, and then from then, you know, we then have obviously the Nadal and Djokovic, and I think he drove them on, and that's what they were obviously incredible. They are incredible athletes themselves, but with that top three, I think Federer was the one who led that and brought on those guys as standard.
And just speaking of Nadal, it was so nice to hear what he said in response to the statement that he was retiring. So he said that he was his friend first and then rival, and that he wished this day would never come. So to have that friendship when they also have been so competitive through the years as well is so nice to see, and it's a testament then to Federer too.
Absolutely, like, it's a complete testament to Federer and all the outpour of affection from all of the tennis players. Obviously the universe love Federer as well, but from all the professional tennis players, if you see on Twitter or on Instagram, there's all these testaments to Federer of how he changed the sport and how he was their idol, and he's such a role model, and his legacy will live on. And like, it's amazing that he has touched so many of his fellow competitors. You know, normally you go out there and it's a dog eat dog, but these guys, he's just so lovable, and he did, as I said, he transcends the sport. It's not just his tennis, but off court he's just this really underwhelmingly normal guy, and I think people can relate to him, and that's what's made him so popular, as well as his incredible tennis.
And his lovely jumpers.
Oh no, that was terrible. That jacket in Wimbledon. He'll never live that down.
It definitely has something like the Liverpool Spice Boys about it for sure. So you mentioned the 12 from 18, and then obviously, I mean, maybe perfectly understandably, things started to slow down a bit at that point. It's very difficult to maintain that rate, and particularly the arrival of the two lads. And we were just discussing before we came on air here, Colin was pointing out that the Nadal and Djokovic both had winning records against him. Why is that?
Yeah, over time, I think that those records obviously worked in their favour. In the beginning, Federer was the more dominant over the two guys. If you look at the two players, like Nadal and Federer had a lot of battles, obviously, over the years, but on clay court, Nadal was pretty much always the favourite. So I want to blame that as the reason why he has a more winning record. Like, his record is a little bit bigger. I think it's 25-16 or something like that, or it's more than that, I think. But
24-16.
24-16. Yeah. So it'd be interesting to look at those stats and see what surfaces they were on, because Nadal was so dominant. He's the king of clay. So how many of those were on clay versus on a hard or grass court? And then Djokovic, they've had played more matches than that. It's closer to those 27 to 24.
23, yeah.
23, okay. Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at the games, as I said, I feel like Federer has raised their games, how good they are. He had to, because if they wanted to catch him, they had to improve the elements in their games. Like, they're very different styles. Like, if you look at Federer and Nadal, it's like the warrior versus like this legend of the sport. They're just very different how they play, so the matchup is very different. Whereas Djokovic plays a little bit more similar to Federer in the way that he plays. Like, he plays quite aggressively. He's up on the baseline as well, tries to dictate the points, tries to take time away from the opponent. So they're quite more of a similar matchup. Very different characters, but similar game styles. But over the years, I think Djokovic has managed to figure out ways to beat Federer. So I think they've managed to find a hole in his backhand, particularly Nadal, because Nadal plays this very heavy topspin left-handed forehand high into the Federer one-handed backhand. So it's very tricky for him to step in and take that early, especially on clay courts, because the idea behind Nadal doing that is to push your opponents back. And Federer liked to play close to the baseline and dictate. So he was always playing at the ball higher than he'd like, and he wasn't able to dominate as much on that side. And then with Djokovic as well, I think he physically, in some of the matches, outlasted him. He had to learn to be so defensively strong, because Federer liked to dictate and play offensively. Djokovic had to learn then to play very defensively. And if you look at him, he's an incredible athlete. Djokovic on the court, he picks up every ball and can play from every area on the court. So I think in more recent years they had the upper hand on him, but in the beginning he was the man, Federer.
And even all those examples that you're saying, like, he drove them on to get better, to improve their game in order to beat him. And it's so important, I feel, in sport to have people like him, like Serena Williams as well. You know, you have that person who drives tennis on, really. So yeah, it's a lot of thanks to him for where tennis is even now at the moment.
Yeah, hugely. Like, thank you to Roger, you know, but also for, like, you know, bringing up the profile of tennis, like, worldwide. You know, so many people tuned in to watch tennis because of Roger Federer in those early days. You know, it grew huge traction, and then these rivalries, amazing rivalries, began between those top three guys. You know, Murray had a bit of a look in, but not really. You know, it was really Djokovic, Nadal, Federer, those three. These are the guys that would draw the crowds at tournaments. Like, ticket sales went up once Federer was playing in tournaments. He just grew this amazing fan base from all around the world. And as I said, then he grew up the profile of tennis, which has been amazing for the sport here and abroad.
He does come across as that, like, really sort of nice guy, and it does. I was reading a couple of pieces last night. One of them about, like, he had this mad temper when he was younger, and he had to smash the racket at one point and ended up having to clean the toilet or something. It seems like the most non-Roger Federer thing that I've ever heard, that he actually managed to almost get on top of that at some point, and because there was never any evidence of that, I don't think. Was there once he...
There were, yeah, he definitely had there's a few videos going around. He definitely had a bit of a temper as a kid, and would actually openly talk about that and how he had to learn to manage that. Like, he'd be breaking tennis rackets at 10 years old. You know, there's videos of him, I think, like, as a little kid doing that. But there has been, over the years, disputes with umpires and whatnot, but he always seemed to maintain his cool, collected character that he has. But, you know, that's something that can be learned, you know, because I have to say, in my own experience, I had a fierce temper as a kid as well.
Had you? Yeah.
Yeah, the first time I broke a tennis racket, my mum said, listen, you have to buy your own one next.
Right.
Like, so I had no tennis racket, so I had to work. I think I was working in her summer camps. It's like I'm 10 years old to try and buy another tennis racket. I never broke another one since.
Why did you break it?
I lost a point or something. I hated losing.
Right.
Yeah, I'm never surprised when you hear about Federer when he was younger that's the way he was. Like, I'm like, I wouldn't be surprised by that, because he's such a fierce competitor, and obviously we see what he's done, so you'd expect him to almost have that in him. And then obviously as you get older, you have more experience and you manage that as you go. So I wasn't surprised whatsoever to hear that. I think a lot of the greats would be like that.
Yeah, but especially in an individual sport, it's all on you. So like, your frustration has to come out some way, and like, the racket is an easy target. But a really interesting fact about that actually is, as a kid, as I said, I had like quite a temper or whatnot. But I remember moving to Holland for a summer to attend the summer camps, and my coach came with me, and she said to the coach over there, she's like, you know, now she's got a bit of a temper, you know, like, so I apologise in advance. And this, I'm like 11 at this time or whatnot. And the coach turns to her and says, that's great, you can't teach that. That's fire in the belly. Right. You know, you can't teach that to kids. We can tone it down and train it and try and express it in another way, but you can't teach that will to win and that, you know, that innate drive to be the best. So that served me, and obviously served him a bit better than it did me.
Listen, you did okay, you did all right. We can't be waking up every morning comparing all of ourselves to Roger Federer. It's not
we never feel good about ourselves.
There was another piece last night, just it was him talking to this reporter about, like, Messi. He seemed to be sort of obsessed with Messi almost, and he was talking about, like, when Messi gets the ball and the three range of shots, are the three options that he has, whether it's like the pass, the shoot, or the run, I guess. And it led to a conversation about Roger Federer and the 20 options that he had as his forehand options, 20 forehand options. Is that a lot?
Is 20 options a lot? Yeah. Yeah, well, of course, that's a huge amount. As I mentioned, like, he can hit with power, he can hit with spin, he can hit the angles, he can hit down, like, it's the direction. You can just do so much. And like, if you look at tennis as a sport, like, it's amazing. You have to have this incredible physical ability as well as this technical ability. So it's quite multifaceted. And then you also have to play on different surfaces. No other sport in the world, they change the surface for the athletes to play on. So 20 options is quite a lot, like, and it's probably accurate, like, as I said, where you can put the ball on the court, there are that many options. And he was just so good at putting them in each of those 20.
What is he going to do? Like, is punditry going to be a thing? Is he going to get involved in the media? Is he going to disappear into the limelight and make jumpers for the rest of his life?
He won't make much of a career in that.
The market will be niche.
Yeah, I don't know if we're going to see him in the game in the coming years.
Right.
He did his ending piece was something like, I'll never leave you. He said, "Tennis, I love you, and I'll never leave you." I can't see him turning into a coach. Like, I don't see that for him. He might do a little bit of punditry and commentary. I'd say that might be where we will see him again, but I'd say he'll take some time off. Obviously, he hasn't been around for the last few years as such, with injuries and whatnot. But I think he might be, have a bit of 2 cents to add to some commentary somewhere. Maybe OTB,
Well, listen, we're not in the market at the minute anymore.
All right.
Let's just put that in. I mean, if he wants to call us, who knows? He just seems like such a, I mean, maybe I'm overstating it, but like, he's almost seems too nice to be a pundit in the way that he'd have to be in there commentating, like you mentioned about Nadal. We've become great pals, we're not really rivals. Like, if he's to be in there critiquing some of these people who are his friends, it's hard to see him be that sort of cutting pundit almost.
Yeah, that's why I kind of find it a struggle to see a place for him in tennis. He may continue on like the players or the council, like he'll have some involvement in the sport.
Yeah.
I just don't think he'll be front and centre of it. But he did say, it's over, but it's not over basically. So we will see him in some capacity, but I can't see him going into a role like a day-to-day job. I don't think he needs the money anyway, so he'll have to do something, obviously, and I think he loves the sport, and that was really evident through his whole career. He loves the sport, so it'll be hard for him to walk away, so hopefully we'll see him in some capacity. Yeah,
I know the tennis world is mourning today, so commiserations and house private please and all that sort of stuff. It's I'm sure there'll be plenty more post-mortem said about him as well over the next while. Thanks a million for coming in, Jenny. Thanks
guys.
Enjoyed that. Take over Roger Federer's